Howdy everyone, my name is Muzamil Ahmad. Today I'm going to be talking to you about Azure. And I know you've been learning a lot about Azure from so many other sessions you've been watching. This session is really about what Azure is, why you should use it, and how exactly you can get started. I would highly recommend also, if you haven't seen the keynote sessions beforehand, watch those. It'll really give you a good foundation for what we're going to be talking about today. All right, so these are just some questions that we like to ask some of our customers. And so just kind of think to yourself about how many of you right now are fully in the cloud. And if I were to kind of see an audience of people here, maybe 5% of you would have your hands up. How many of you are fully and only on premises? Probably about another 5%. How about using only Visual Studio or only open source? Probably the same split. And how many of you are worried about privacy or things like security? Most likely all the hands would be going up right now. Now, the reality that we've learned from our customers is whether you're all in the cloud or all on premises, most of us are somewhere in between. Probably about 90% of our customers are either making their journey into the cloud or making their journey to fully being in the cloud. And also when it comes to developer tools, whether you're using open source, or using Visual Studio and .NET, it's really up to you. And you need to be able to have the right tools to be able to work with what you've got. And worried about privacy and security, all of us are in this day and age. We're just a few days or a week away from the next headline, from the next company being worried about their privacy and security and losing some potential trust with their customers. So these are all the things that are kind of top of mind for all of us here today. And I've been making some of my travels around the world and visiting with so many of my customers and wondering, why is it important for us to even have this understanding of, why is technology so important? Just in this situation here, I was in Warsaw, and I actually was an international traveler. I didn't have any money. I didn't have any euros. I didn't have any zlotys. I didn't have anything on hand. But I still needed something to drink because I was pretty jet lagged. So what did I do? I looked around and tried to find something and couldn't find it. But luckily, I was able to find this vending machine. This vending machine had a very friendly Polish digital assistant asking me to insert my credit card. My credit card's all the way from the United States, and I swiped it and it worked just fine. And I was able to get my black energy drink, which I've heard is very similar to our Red Bull drink here that we drink so much in the United States that I know is from actually in Austria. And I was able to just move on my day and go and have my presentation. So when you think about just something like payments, how does all this happen? Does this all work on someone's computer, on someone's desk underneath their office? Or is this working with maybe something like the cloud? Most likely, it's the cloud. And this is the kind of things that allow you to leapfrog all of the traditional kinds of infrastructure and technology to be able to do really cool things. And at the end, do what really matters the most, which is serving your customers. But with all of this cool technology, there can definitely be a lot of confusion. So what we're going to try to do for you today is reduce the amount of confusion you have and make it easier to plan your journey to the cloud. So what we're first going to do is talk about what is Azure. And as I've mentioned before, if you haven't watched the keynote, I would highly recommend it. It'll go through some of the key pillars of Azure and what are the promises that Azure makes and what are some of the cool things customers are doing with Azure. Then we're going to discuss why should you use Azure? What are some of the benefits? What are some of the features that might help you move to the cloud in the way that you want to, when you want to? And lastly, how can you get started? There's so many links, there's so many opportunities and ways to get started. We're going to try to make that as easy for you as possible. So what is Azure? You might have recognized this phrase from before, but Azure is fit. It's productive, hybrid, intelligent, and trusted. And many of you also might be wondering, why should I pick Microsoft Azure over Amazon Web Services or Google Cloud? Well, we believe that our cloud is more fit than the other clouds. We're more productive, more hybrid, more intelligent, and more trusted. And you can see the evidence behind those claims in our other presentations. We're not going to be going through this here today, but you can definitely look out for those. What Azure really is, it's a set of core infrastructure, services, and tools that would allow you to run your business in the easiest and fastest way possible. Now, many of you probably already know all of this, but when you look at core infrastructure is really data centers. And what you're looking at here is actually a single data center. And when you look at our regions, we have over 50 regions around the world. A region is a group of data centers, and this is just one. If you've seen videos about our cloud, and seen videos about our infrastructure and our hardware, the software that we run on the inside, that's all about a single data center that gets grouped together to have over 50 regions around the world, which is pretty incredible when you look at the amount of money we're investing in this. This is an example of the complete opposite side. So first you saw what Azure can physically touch and feel like. This is the end result. This is what the Azure Portal looks like. So as an end user, as a developer, or as an IT pro, you might be logging into Azure and experiencing Azure in some way, shape, or form in this way. And if you look on the left-hand side, those are some of our key services, and on the right-hand side is the actual output of that. So think of it as like a menu for you to navigate through your digital world. All right, so as I said before, we're not going to spend a ton of time on what Azure is because we've talked a little bit more about what the core infrastructure side. So on the actual services, right? This is the infrastructure, here are the services. What are the things that I can do with Azure? So I can use things like virtual machines or containers and serverless and web and mobile. And I'm sure if you're a developer, an IT pro, these words are resonating so well with you because they're so hot at this moment. Data and analytics has always been something that's been a priority for the C-suite for the last decade. Artificial intelligence, cognitive services, and IoT. That's just a small amount of things that you can do with Azure. And as an example, you can use containers, and you can run them whichever way you want, whether it's on Docker, on DCOS, or on Kubernetes. In addition, things like serverless allows you to do functions and logic apps to where you don't have to build the entire infrastructure, you just manage the transactions and manage the traffic. And lastly, things like vision, speech, language, and cognitive services, which allow you to engage with your customers in much more revolutionary and personal ways. The last aspect we want to talk about is the tools aspect. So Microsoft has tons of languages, frameworks, and tools that support your businesses. But one thing that I really want to talk about and really drive home is how Microsoft has changed over the last few years. So perhaps if you were to have seen this slide 3 to 5 years ago, and you would have asked us, Microsoft, what tools and frameworks and languages do you support? This is what we would have shown you. But I want to really focus and talk to you about how we've changed over the last few years with our new CEO and the new vision of our company, how much more vast our offering is. From DevOps, management, applications, frameworks and tools, databases and middleware, and infrastructure, the amount that we support from open source is pretty incredible. There's actually a speaker from GitHub who presented at one of our more recent events and mentioned that Microsoft contributes more to GitHub and the GitHub community than any other cloud provider, which is pretty incredible. Now, we still know we have a lot more work to do in this community, and just know that we're really willing to kind of get down with that open source community and work with them to find out what your needs are. All right, so that should give you a little bit of an understanding of what Azure is. Now we're going to focus on why should I use Azure. If you look at these pain points of CIOs, you can see that balancing and focusing on cost optimization and digital opportunities, doing more work with a small team, with the same team or even smaller. I could ask many of you listening right now, when was the last time you were asked to do and create something with more resources than you had available? you probably end up looking at your watch because it happened so recently. Migrating to the cloud, taking all that information and data you have and moving it into the new world. And also doing that by strengthening your cybersecurity, right? Privacy, transparency, compliance, all of those things are top of minds for CIOs. Number 5, using advanced analytics. As I mentioned before, some of the things, these have been on radars for executives for over a decade. And lastly, modernizing legacy systems and renovating your technical core, which basically means taking all of our old stuff, making it work in the new world, and then changing the engine of the core of our technology. Now, these are all things that you already know. It's not something that I'm telling you that is news to you. You're all probably working on something directly related to one of these pain points. But what I want to do is try to explain a concept that I think sometimes may get lost in translation with the myriad of information and news that you all hear. I want to talk about cost optimization versus digital opportunities. And for me, for us, the lever is the capacity in your data center. Right? Let's say your data center capacity is what judges your ability to either save or spend a lot of money or take advantage of digital opportunities. The model for many of our customers, and many of our customers that might still be on premises or might still be wanting to make that shift into the cloud, is on the left-hand side, you have absolutely optimized for cost. Year after year after year is reducing costs, reducing any kind of inefficiencies in your P&L, in your technologies. So you've optimized for cost. Now, that also means that your data center capacity is probably at an effective but minimal capacity. Now, what that means is on the right-hand side, your opportunities to take advantage of digital opportunities is also going to be relatively small. Think about that example of me trying to use a vending machine earlier. How would that play into this situation? Now, another option is to go on the other side, right? Let's say you're the Chief Innovation Officer. You're all about creating and taking advantage of those digital opportunities. But what will happen to your cost? Your cost optimization will go down because your capacity for your data center has to go up to support things like machine learning or large infrastructure. Now, this probably isn't a favorable situation for many as well, because if you look on the left-hand side, your investors won't be very happy with that. Maybe the shareholders in some way, if you promise them long-term value. However, it's going to be a little bit tough to pull that off. Now, if there were a way to have that cost optimization while also being able to have the maximum amount of digital opportunities, that sounds like the ideal situation, doesn't it? Well, the ideal situation isn't a dream. That's actually what the cloud offers you. You have the left-hand side of optimizing for your cost, and on the right-hand side, using the digital opportunities, which allows you to have an on-demand cloud capacity. The best way I can explain this to you is similar to renting a car. If you rent the car and you only pay for when you use it versus building a car, building the tires, building the air conditioning system, building the sound system, doing all of that work, or you rent the car and you only pay for it when you use it. That's the real model of the cloud. Oh, and by the way, the cloud will probably be one of the coolest cars you've ever seen. Now, this concept of hybrid, right, which we talked about in the very beginning of how many of you are on premises, how many of you are in the cloud, and how many of you are somewhere in between, this is something that I think would be really important for you to understand. Hybrid is also highly discussed, as I said before, in the Tech Summit keynote, so I don't want to spend too much time on this, but realize that hybrid is not just about where your application sits. If your application sits in the cloud or if it sits on premises. It's also about your identity and your authentication. It's also about your unified cloud platform, your data platform, whether your data is on premises or in the cloud or somewhere in between. And your security and your management is most likely on premises now, but most likely in a place that most companies want to have it on in the cloud because it's just much more easier to manage. So think about it that way and break down the things that you can and can't move. If you have regulatory, financial, or even executive decrees that do or don't allow you to do something, break down what can and can't move to the cloud, and you'll find that you won't be feeling as left behind. We also talked about privacy and security, and I wanted to really just talk to you about what Microsoft is doing to invest in privacy and security and how you reap the benefits of those. So at our Microsoft Cyber Defense and Operations Center, we invest at least $1 billion in testing out real situations and scenarios that might affect our customers. For example, we do continuous testing and monitoring, and what that does is we basically split up our teams. You look at the teams and it becomes almost like a battlefield. The left-hand side, you have the red team, and their job is to prevent any breaches. They review the threat models, they review the code, they do testing and security, and the blue team on the other side, they assume that a breach has happened. They do war game exercises, they do live site penetration testing, they do centralized security logging and monitoring. And what that allows us to do is identify and address the potential gaps that we find. It helps us improve the mean time to detection and recovery, and it reduces exposure to internal gaps. So that's how we manage our infrastructure. But how do you benefit from that? Well, we take the learnings from all of this and we put it into our security graph, where we collaborate with organizations and partners from security and privacy around the world. And we share that information. And then when you log in, for example, into your Azure subscription, you'll be able to see what's happening. You'll be able to see what patterns are occurring in the global secure space, and you'll be able to see if any of those have affected your environment, and then be able to take action on those things from the same place. Pretty cool. All right, so now we've talked about what Azure is, right? Azure is a set of tools and services and core infrastructure that allow you to enter and sustain and be successful in the digital technology world. We learned about why you should use it, and now lastly, we're going to focus on how exactly you can get started. This was another very cool sign that I saw when I was doing some of my travels, where it was telling me, before you cross the street, be careful and make sure you look both ways. And I just want to tell you the same thing, right? When you're planning and starting to get started on how you want to use the cloud, there's definitely some things you should be aware of. There's definitely some things that you can look out for, and I'm going to share those with you. I would recommend the best way to get started is by using the Azure solutions to find a solution that works for you and for your business. Now, we have, at the time of this discussion, 10 to 12 solutions, anywhere from SAP to Red Hat on Azure, to IoT, to DevTest. Now, here is the most important part. When you are trying to get something done, any kind of project, and you're starting on your own, it's best to do something that has the least amount of friction involved. Now, that doesn't mean that if you want to tomorrow do IoT for your business, that you can't do it. You can absolutely do it, but the amount of review, the amount of buy-off, the amount of change, technology change, as well as cultural change that would have to happen before you get the benefits of the IoT solution, it might be a long time. And if you're trying to prove some business value, if you're trying to prove what Azure and the cloud can do for your company, it might be best to start small. So we would recommend starting off with something like DevTest or backup, archive, and disaster recovery. And the reason for starting off with something smaller than that is that more than likely, those processes, those outcomes will be contained within 1 or 2 business groups. So whether it's the development team or IT, or the development team or security, or if it's IT pro and security, right? Whoever those people are, you're going to have a smaller group of people that touch those outcomes, and you might be able to get a small team of 5 to 7 people or 5 to 7 stakeholders that can represent exactly what the solution will do for you. And what I would recommend is when you go to those solutions, you can actually find information. You can find reference architectures, you can find customer stories to tell you everything you need to know about that solution and how you can get started and what pitfalls you should look out for. So as I mentioned, right, we would recommend when you're going from left to right, you consider the recommendations that we've made. As I said before, if HPC is where your business wants to go ahead and get started. This is just a fundamentals situation where we're trying to give our best recommendations of, gosh, you've got 10 to 12 solutions. Where do we get started? This is our recommendation. As I mentioned before, dev test is a very common starting point. One reason is because it has a lot less political and capital strings involved in your company. And also 50% of infrastructure spend is on non-production. So why not reduce that and optimize that as much as possible? Another way that you can get started is by actually getting started with Azure on our free account. So if you go to www.azure.com/free, you get a $200 credit to explore for 30 days. And then in addition, you get 12 months of popular free services. And then there's also 25 services that are actually always free. So go ahead and click on the link and get started there if you want. Another tool we have for you is the Azure Roadmap. So if you were to search for the Azure Roadmap, you can actually find and see what are all the product categories and what is the status of any project you're working on. So for example, if machine learning or advanced analytics or Azure containers is something that really matters for you, and you're building a plan to be able to know when and how you can be able to adopt these services, you can actually click subscribe and be able to follow from an RSS feed all of the changes happening to that specific product or feature or solution. In addition, you can also use something called the Azure Marketplace. You can leverage the Azure Marketplace from actually inside the Azure Portal. And what it does is it has these pre-configured setups that allow you to take advantage of things that companies have already solved. Now, whether this company has offered this application for you for free or for per user or a limit for a specific amount of usage in a specific amount of time, that's up to the individual who created or company who created the application. But what this means is you don't have to get started from zero. You can start from, instead of step 0, from step maybe 3 or step 4. And so if you want to, for example, connect a Linux machine using Ubuntu, there's already a protocol enabled in one of these apps to be able to do that for you. And you just have to configure small things instead of creating it all yourself. So I would encourage you to look by type, by licensing type, by vendor, to find anything you need, buy those specific features so you can get started without having to build everything yourself. And lastly, we also have Azure Support, which allows you to really find out what is happening with your specific service, what's happening with your production workloads, if there's any business critical functions that are on or offline. And if you actually go to the site, you can find a specific support plan and also be able to stay incredibly close and engaged to what's happening to your specific Azure environment. The last thing I want to leave with you is that we actually have free Azure courses. They're online and hands-on labs at azure.com/essentials that can help you get an understanding from how to do basic things like creating virtual machines, but also if you're already a developer and you have a background of Amazon Web Services and you want to try some things out at Azure, it'll kind of give you holding your hand on how to go from one platform to the other. So be sure to check that out. So what I also wanted to do was leave you with some real customer examples of how customers have used our products to be able to benefit their customers. For CarMax, for example, in dev test, their scenario was they wanted to deliver a faster response to 16 million site visitors that come to their website each month. They were wanting to move towards a DevOps model, which allowed them to have better infrastructure and accelerate the development of their new digital services. But in addition, it was costing them a lot of money. So they wanted to reduce the storage costs and gain scale for all of their website images. So what did they do? Their solution was actually not in our words or not in my words, it's actually directly from the customer. Azure Storage provided effectively limitless storage with read-accessible geo-replication, so you could deliver increased capability and resilience that was cost-effective. So when you're thinking about that scale we talked about before on cost optimization and digital opportunities and data center capacity, this is a pretty close example of how that actually gets applied in real life. This also allowed them to generate images of different sizes on the fly and cache them for use when needed by various consumer devices. This gave them the ability to modernize the site, making it 100% mobile friendly, and it moved them to a more dynamic DevOps development paradigm. So you must also be asking, all right, you did all that work, you used Azure, who cares? What was the impact? Well, the impact was that it tripled the number of images stored and achieved the ability to deliver the right image to the right device. Meaning, if you're looking at a picture of a car and you have an iPhone X versus a Samsung 9 Plus, they're not going to send you the same image. It's going to send you the image that's going to be for the right aspect ratio for your right device. And some other customer quotes was that Azure PaaS gave us access to a complete set of capabilities like Azure Redis Cache that we didn't have to build ourselves. And with rapid access to development resources in Azure, they can set up, try, fail, repeat. Our whole innovation model speeds up with Azure PaaS. And one other story I wanted to give, which I think is very simple but really resonates with speed, is there's a company called Generali who actually had, at this point, a 1-week lead time for backup restoration. And after 9/11, they were actually really close to the Twin Towers, and they decided they needed a better solution because they're only blocks away. And they needed a better solution to serve their 68 countries and 65 million customer base. So what did they do? They used Azure Site Recovery, which allowed them to coordinate a whole group of virtual machines. And they used Azure, their own data center, as a recovery site. And this allows them to run off Azure indefinitely during a disaster. The impact of that was that the disaster recovery cost was reduced by 65%. Once again, look at that visual in your mind of digital opportunities versus cost optimization, the data center in between. It gave them an easier method of testing, and instead of one entire week, they were able to get their business back up again in minutes with a maximum data loss of 30 seconds. All right, so we've come a really long way in talking about what is Azure, why should I use Azure, and how can I get started. I hope this has been really helpful for you and for your business in finding your journey through the digital transformation.